Back to OpenLine. We are talking with Thomas Schwartz, Vanderbilt history and political science professor, all about politics. As we went to break, we were talking about the Virginia race for governor, which is happening tonight, and it's a big deal. Who's going to win, Democrat, Republican? Well, now we know. It's the Democrat won. So they've called it for the Democrat. Is that a surprise? What does that mean nationally? What are people going to be talking about tomorrow as far as that's concerned?
I think that what it is the Democrats will emphasize, of course, that this is a repudiation of Trump. There were a lot of reasons to think the Democrats really should have won Virginia. Hillary Clinton, it's the only state she won in the South. Virginia's demographics have changed in a very favorable direction for Democrats. Nevertheless, that they held on. I mean, it was getting close toward the end, and Virginia does have a very Gillespie had taken some positions, for example, on preserving Confederate monuments and others that would have raised real issues had he won in terms of how strong some of those cultural issues were. The fact the Democrats prevailed, I think, is kind of a sigh of relief for the party that it did hold on there, but it probably doesn't mean a huge national significance.
Another big issue in the Democratic Party, we talked about the unity and where's the party going. This book by Donna Brazile that came out. And I've seen it characterized that she said that the race was rigged between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton. I don't think that's exactly what she said in the book, but what is this book? What is the impact of the book, and what are people taking away from it?
Well, the impact of the book, I think, is that for Donna Brazile, who's seen as a sort of absolute Democratic loyalist, to in some ways criticized the Clinton campaign for the fact that it did control the DNC from the very beginning, and that it made it harder for Bernie Sanders to get a real voice. This is something that many Bernie Sanders, many of those in the grassroots Democratic Party feel it confirms what they've always believed. And Elizabeth Warren's quick reaction the other day when she was asked whether she accepted that shows that there's still a great deal of feeling on the left of the Democratic Party, which has been in some ways in the ascendancy, in that Sanders has defined, for example, the pursuit of health care for all, a sort of national Medicare type program, universal health insurance, this sort of thing, as being core Democratic values now. So in a way it pushes the party to the left. Brazile book really does show that there's a division within the party, at least on some ideological issues. Even though the party still comes together against Trump, there are some of these divisions that are there.
You kind of wonder who is going to take over the party.
Well, that's, yeah.
You know, yeah. Bernie Sanders was very liberal, right? And Hillary Clinton was more moderate. And so what happens? I mean, does someone emerge who is really, really liberal, or is it someone who is more moderate? The Clintons were more moderate, always. Bill Clinton was more moderate. Well, I don't know if people buy that, but it's a fact. He was more moderate. Bernie Sanders was way more liberal. And you said that side of the party's been in the ascendancy.
Yes.
I wonder how far that goes.
Well, I think what that side of the party could use would be an attractive spokesperson, someone who would sort of capture that, who's younger than Sanders. And Sanders has a great deal of appeal to many activists, but he is in his sort of late 70s now, and it's hard to see him running another presidential campaign. But you need someone to embody this. Perhaps it's Elizabeth Warren, but it might be Senator Harris from California, for example, who's also, or maybe Senator Booker, although Booker has ties to Wall Street that some of the activists don't like. So someone needs to emerge, maybe of the younger generation of the Democrats, maybe to redefine some of these issues. But it does seem to me that the party itself has moved much more to the left.
Historically speaking, all right, so you have, I wonder how big the swings are going to be. It seems like for a while, I feel like both candidates elected moderate versions of their party. And now I wonder if we're going to enter an age where they're more extreme versions. You know, the pendulum swings one way and then the other way. Yeah. You think that's possible?
Well, the hard thing here is actually thinking about what Trump represents, because while he may in some sense represent an extreme, in other ways he was someone who changed several major beliefs of the Republican Party. I mean, his policies on trade, his policies on immigration, and that they accelerated some tendencies within the party that were not embraced by all Republicans. Republicans used to be a free trade party. They used to be far more open about immigration. The Democrats had a lot more problems with immigration when labor unions were more affected by cheap labor coming across, and then they were interested in more restrictions. So, in a way, there's a sort of stylistic extreme of Trump, and maybe a Bernie Sanders, the sort of classifying the enemy, this sort of thing, either as sort of the predatory foreign nations or capitalists, as Sanders would put it. Stylistically, that's there. There's a sort of extreme rhetoric on both parties, but in substance, what we're seeing is something of a political realignment around populism, which is not exactly clear how that's going to shake out.
So you're saying it's hard to say Trump is a super conservative Republican.
Right. He is not a Ted Cruz. He is not an ideological conservative. I mean, in fact, Trump, as you well know, used to give money to the Democrats, believed at times has spoken highly of a universal health care system. Trump has been all over the place politically, and now he has embraced certain conservative positions, but in some ways, he's also broke from what had been conservative ideology.
Let's go to Bob. Hello, Bob.
Oh, hello. I think that's very important, especially in politics, but they don't want to discuss the curses that's going on. You know, a gun's not a toy, you know, they're not even insured. And the curse of human trafficking, the curse of, 7 million abortions, dead babies, and the curse of, what is it now, 60 or 70 million illegal aliens. You know, they don't keep track, but most of the statistics from the 80s or 90s, you know, and the politicians don't talk about it, so the violence just gets worse. The church in every sect is even philosophy's under attack, you know, the basic college thing of the root of evil. People bully, it just gets bad.
Bob, okay, thank you. I think I understand what you're saying there. There's certain things that aren't talked about, but boy, some of the things he mentioned, I think they're talked about a lot. When we're talking about immigration, abortion, these are things that are talked about a lot and divide the country to no end.
Absolutely, yeah. No, those are, I mean, the hot button issues of our day. Essentially around that: trade, immigration, cultural issues like abortion still.
The president's approval rating, it seems like whenever I turn on the TV, they're talking about how it's gone lower.
Right.
And it's at historic lows. And yet, it seems like he's popular on other levels to me. I felt like going into the campaign, going into Election Day, which you said was a year ago tomorrow. Fascinating. It was a year ago, so he's been in office for 1 year as of, well, he was elected a year ago. Tomorrow. But I don't even know how much polls matter anymore. And that's what Trump would say. But you hear over and over, his approval rating's low, and then he pulled off that victory, and I just wonder, are his supporters so passionate that he can overcome these low ratings?
I think that's one of the things polls don't always measure as carefully, is the intensity of support. And so even though he has low approval ratings, he still maintains an intense support, particularly among Republicans. The party, in that sense, the base of the party is far more Trump-like than many of the officials, in which case that means that he still has the protection of the Republican Party, even though he has very low ratings. Richard Nixon's problem, for example, when he, after Watergate, was his collapse also occurred among Republicans, not just Democrats. And when you lose that intensity of support, you can then be subject to, as he was, pressures to leave office and resign. In Trump's case, it would take a lot more. I mean, the Russia investigation, something that would have to really shake that core belief of many of his supporters, and I don't think that's going to happen.
Where do you think the Russian investigation, how, I guess I'm asking you to predict here, but how big a deal could that be? We've seen Manafort get indicted, and so what impact does that have? Well, there's his former campaign chairman indicted.
I think Manafort's indicted for crimes, other crimes as well. I mean, it does say something about the president, who he selected, the people that were around him. I think it's likely, for example, Flynn is going to be indicted, partly also because of some of his behavior as a lobbyist and dealing with foreign governments. And so I think what you're going to see is probably the investigation. Mueller will get a number of people near the president, but unless he manages to flip someone and the evidence is overwhelming that somehow the president was involved, I don't think in the end this is going to be a cloud over the Trump years, but I don't think it's going to bring Trump down.
How long can Mueller investigate? Is there a limit? Or could this go on Trump's entire presidency?
It could go on for quite a while. I mean, the Iran-Contra thing, for example, went on for years. I think unless there's a strong vote in 2018 or 2020 that reelects Trump, or that puts a lot more Republicans in so that he would be actually capable of surviving a firing of Mueller or something like that, or if Mueller doesn't come up with something much more substantial in the next year or so, I think that could probably shut down the investigation, or else it could go on for a while. There are financial crimes. There are a lot of possible financial crimes, and some of the people around Trump seem to have played fast and loose in some of these matters, and it could go on for quite a while.
Were you surprised when Manafort was indicted?
No, he was one of these people that seemed, I think, to be the most vulnerable. In the FBI raid early on, there were indications that he was on the target list from an early point.
And so Flynn, you think, is likely?
Flynn is likely also because he did have these connections, particularly with Turkey, actually, rather than Russia, but also with Russia, where he was dealing and behaving in a way that wasn't as transparent, and I think would be likely to get him into trouble.
All right, why don't we take a break? Fascinating. We'll take a break. If you want to call in, there's a number, 615-737-PLUS, 615-737-7587. Take a break. Be back right after this.